वेलकम सिटीजन्स ऑफ यूट्यूब। आपका एक बार फिर से स्वागत है मेरे चैनल पर। आज मैं रिएक्ट करने वाला हूँ एक वीडियो पर जिसका टाइटल है व्हाट इज़ द बेस्ट पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम। ये दिस इज़ ऑन द चैनल लेक्स क्लिप्स और इसके सब्सक्राइबर्स है 1.12 मिलियन। तो आई विल गिव द लिंक टू द ओरिजिनल वीडियो इन द डिस्क्रिप्शन। सो लेट्स चेक आउट व्हाट इज़ द बेस्ट पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम। मैं खुद जानने के लिए एक्साइटेड हूँ। लेट्स गो। Maybe the video could get a little complicated, so bear with me.
You just kind of painted a beautiful picture of comparison. This is the way we think about ideologies because is what's working better. Do you separate?
This is a clip of a entire length podcast. तो इससे पहले जो बातें हुई होंगी मे बी उसके बारे में he is referring to those conversations कि he has painted a wonderful picture. We'll be starting a new topic, I assume. I haven't watched the video.
In your mind the ideals of communism to the Stalinist implementation of communism, and again, capitalism and American implementation of capitalism. And as we look at now the 21st century, where yes, this idea, of socialism being a potential political system that we would, or economic system we would operate under in the United States, rising up again as an idea. So how do we think about that again in the 21st century, about these ideas, fundamental deep ideas of communism and capitalism?
Okay, before he answers, let me explain some of the terms that he used. As far as I know, it, for the new viewers or listeners who are not familiar with this topic, there is a spectrum of political and economic ideologies. Let's assume that on the one end, capitalism exists. Capitalism is an economic system in which the market forces govern the price of the commodities. For example, let's say मेरे पास एक pencil है. Okay, I have a pencil and I do not decide what will be the price of this pencil. What decides the price of this pencil are the market forces. So let's say मैं शॉपकीपर हूँ और मैं चाहता हूँ इस पेंसिल को 10 रुपए का बेचना. तो एक कस्टमर मेरे पास आएगा एंड आई विल टेल कि ये 10 रुपए की पेंसिल है. तो कस्टमर बोलेगा नो हाउ कैन इट बी ऑफ 10 रुपीज़, आपके साइड वाला तो 2 रुपये में बेच रहा है. सो आई विल थिंक ओके आई कैन नॉट सेल इट फॉर 10 रुपीज़, आई हैव टू सेल इट फॉर 2 रुपीज़. नाउ ऐसा इसीलिए हो पाया बिकॉज जो मेरा पड़ोसी है, नेबर शॉपकीपर, ही इज़ फ्री टू सेल द पेंसिल एट वट एवर कॉस्ट ही वॉन्ट्स एंड आई हैव टू कम्पीट विद हिम टू स्टे इन द मार्केट. तो इस कंपटीशन की वजह से क्या हुआ कि जो इस पेंसिल की एक्चुअल कॉस्ट है वो डिटरमाइन हुई बाय दिस competition. So basically that is the system of capitalism. It is very explained in a very simple way. Socialism क्या होता है कि in which the government steps in to some degree and determines the cost of things and commodities. So let's say the government says कि मैं इस पेंसिल को 5 रुपए से कम में नहीं बेच सकता हूँ. Also, in a socialist system, government will heavily tax the capitalists, businessmen, and use the tax money to provide welfare schemes for the poor people, which is like a basic definition of socialism. इसमें क्या होगा, if the government heavily tax the businessmen, तो businessmen will have reduced incentives to sell their commodities or to enter into the market. सो इसकी फ़ायदा भी है, घाटा भी है. फ़ायदा ये है कि गवर्नमेंट विल हैव मोर मनी टू स्पेंड ऑन वेलफेयर स्कीम्स, बट एट द सेम टाइम इट विल रिड्यूस द नंबर ऑफ पीपल एंटरिंग इनटू द मार्केट, विच विल stop the competition and the price of commodities will rise. And the last thing on the spectrum, पहले capitalism, socialism, communism. Communism में government has complete control over production, supply and demand. Not on demand, of course. Demand is determined by people. So the government will decide price of every commodity. Every production will be done by government. Government will own every property. So इस सिस्टम में आइडियली ये होना चाहिए कि no person is rich or poor, every person belongs to the same status, and government will produce everything, decide the cost of everything, and provide it according to the needs of the people. जिसको जितने की ज़रूरत है उतना मिलेगा. So इसके भी काफ़ी फ़ायदे और घाटे हैं, but basically ये systems होते हैं. I don't want to delve much deeper into all these terminologies and discuss the advantages and disadvantages of all these systems. So let's move.
In the Marxist schema, there was something called feudalism, which was supposedly destroyed by the bourgeoisie.
One more thing. Over the years, different leaders have come up जिनकी खुद की definitions अलग अलग हैं for communism. So let's say he's saying in Marxism. So he was the like initial proponent of communism. तो Marx की Karl Marx की एक definition है. And later on, Lenin came up, Stalin came up. So they all have different versions of communism. Mao came up in China. So based on these. So when we say ki Marxist communism, we are referring to the communism that was given by Karl Marx. When we say Lenin communism, then and so on and so forth.
Who created capitalism. And then the working class was supposed to destroy capitalism and create socialism. But socialism wasn't the end stage. The end stage was going to be communism. So that's why the Communist Party in the Soviet Union first built socialism, transcending capitalism. The next stage was socialism, and the end game, the final stage, was communism. So their version of socialism was derived from Marx, and Marx argued that the problem was capitalism had been very beneficial for a while. It had produced greater wealth and greater opportunity than feudalism had, but then it had come to serve only the narrow interests of the so-called bourgeoisie or the capitalists themselves. And so for humanity's sake,
Sorry. Maybe if you're familiar with the term bourgeoisie, then it's okay. You can skip this part. So basically, when Karl Marx came up with this theory of communism, he had two sections of society. One was bourgeoisie, who were the capitalists, and the other was proletariat, if I'm not wrong. And proletariat were the workers. So bourgeoisie exploited the proletariat in according to Karl Marx in a capitalist system.
the universal class, the working class, needed to overthrow capitalism in order for greater productivity, greater wealth to be produced, for all of humanity to flourish and on a higher level. So you couldn't have socialism unless you destroyed capitalism. So that meant no markets, no private property, no so called parliaments or bourgeois parliaments as they were called. So you got to socialism in Marx's schema by transcending, by eliminating capitalism. Now, Marx also called for freedom. He said that this elimination of markets and private property and bourgeois parliaments would produce greater freedom in addition to greater abundance. However, everywhere this was tried, it produced tyranny and mass violence, death, and shortages. Everywhere it was tried. There's no exception in historical terms. And so it's very interesting.
So it didn't pan out the way he planned.
Marx insisted that capitalism had to be eliminated. You couldn't have markets. Markets were chaos. You needed planning. You couldn't have hiring of wage labor. That was wage slavery. Right? You couldn't have private property because that was a form of theft. So, in the Marxist scheme, somehow you were going to eliminate capitalism and get to freedom. It turned out you didn't get to freedom, so then people said, well, you can't blame Marx because he said we needed freedom. He was pro freedom. So, it's kind of like dropping a nuclear bomb. You say you're going to drop a nuclear bomb, but you want to minimize civilian casualties. So the dropping of the nuclear bomb is the elimination of markets, private property, and parliaments. but you're going to bring freedom, or you're going to minimize civilian casualties. So you drop the nuclear bomb, you eliminate the capitalism, and you get famine, deportation, no constraints on executive power, and not abundance, but shortages. And people say, well, that's not what Marx said. That's not what I said. I said I wanted to minimize civilian casualties. The nuclear bomb goes off, and there's mass civilian casualties. And
Yeah.
you keep saying, but I said
Yeah.
drop the bomb, but minimize civilian casualties. So that's where we are. That's history, not philosophy.
Yeah.
I'm speaking about historical examples, all the cases that we
Yes.
have. Marx was not a theorist of inequality. Marx was a theorist of alienation, of dehumanization, of fundamental uh, constraints, or what he called fetters on productivity and on wealth, which he all attributed to capitalism. Marx wasn't bothered by inequality. He was bothered by something deeper,
Yeah.
something worse, right? Those socialists who figured this out, who understood that if you dropped the nuclear bomb, there was no way to minimize civilian casualties. Those socialists who came to understand that if you eliminated capitalism, markets, private property, and parliaments, if you eliminated that, you wouldn't get freedom. Those Marxists, those socialists became what we would call social democrats, or people who would use the state to regulate the market, not to eliminate the market. They would use the state to redistribute income, not to destroy private property and markets. And so, this in the Marxist schema was apostasy,
Hmm.
because they were accepting markets and private property. They were accepting alienation and wage slavery. They were accepting capitalism in principle, but they wanted to fix it. They wanted to ameliorate. They wanted to regulate. And so they became what was denounced as revisionists, not true Marxists, not real revolutionaries, but parliamentary road, parliamentarians. We know this as normal politics, normal social democratic politics from the European case or from the American case. But they are not asking to eliminate capitalism, blaming markets and private property. So, this rift among the socialists, the ones who are for elimination of capitalism, transcending capitalism, otherwise, you could never, ever get to abundance and freedom in the Marxist schema, versus those who accept capitalism but want to regulate and redistribute. That rift on the left has been with us almost from the beginning. It's a kind of civil war on the left.
Just want to quickly note this irony. According to Karl Marx, he wanted to uh, increase freedom in society by putting forward these economic ideas. But ironically, the idea itself is to take away private property, take away private liberty, take everything away from the people and give it to the system and the state. Just pointing it out.
Between the Leninists and the Social Democrats, or the revisionists, as they're known pejoratively by the Leninists. We have the same confusion today in the world today, where people also cite Marx, saying capitalism is a dead end, and we need to drop that nuclear bomb and get freedom, get no civilian casualties, versus those who say, yes, there are inequities, there's a lack of equality of opportunity, there are many other issues that we need to deal with, and we can fix those issues. We can regulate, we can redistribute. I'm not advocating this as a political position. I'm not taking a political position myself. I'm just saying that there's a confusion on the left between those who accept capitalism and want to regulate it, versus those who think capitalism is inherently evil, and if we eliminate it, we'll get to a better world, when in fact history shows that if you eliminate capitalism, you get to a worse world. The problems might be real, but the solutions are worse.
From history's lessons, now we have deep, painful lessons, but there's not that many of them. Our history is relatively short as a human species. Do we have a good answer on the left of Leninist Marxist versus social democrat versus capitalism versus any um, anarchy? Do we have sufficient samples from history to make better decisions about the future of our politics and economics?
For sure. We have the American Revolution.
This is the defining question. वो पूछ रहा है कि क्या, after considering everything that has happened in history, have we reached a stage where we can decide कि कौन सा सिस्टम बेस्ट है? क्या हम उस स्टेज पर हैं, हम ये डिसाइड कर सके डेफिनेटली कि कौन सा सिस्टम हमारे लिए ठीक है? Let's I also want to know.
Which was a revolution not about class, not about workers, not about a so called universal class of the working class, elimination of capitalism, markets, and the bourgeoisie, but was about the category citizen. It was about universal humanity, where everyone, in theory, could be part of it as a citizen. The revolution fell short of its own ideals. Not everyone was a citizen.
Right.
For example, if you didn't own property, you were a male but didn't own property, you didn't have full rights of a citizen. If you were a female, whether you owned property or not, you weren't a full citizen. If you were imported from Africa against your will, you were a slave and not a citizen. And so not everyone was afforded the rights in actuality that were declared in principle.
He is referring to American Revolution, but the same conditions were there in Europe also. After the French Revolution, uh, male who only owned property were allowed to vote, not unemployed or like male who didn't have any property and female didn't have a vote at all. In fact, if I remember correctly, females got a right to vote very later on, like in 1940s or something in France.
However, over time, the category citizen could expand, and slaves could be emancipated and they could get the right to vote. They could become citizens. Non property owning males could get the right to vote and become full citizens. Females could get the right to vote and become full citizens. In fact, eventually my mother was able to get a credit card in her own name in the 1970s without my father having to co sign the paperwork. It took a long time. But nonetheless, the category citizen can expand and it can become a universal category. So we have that, the citizen universal humanity model of the American Revolution, which was deeply flawed at the time it was introduced, but fixable over time. We also had that separation of powers and constraint on executive power that we began this conversation with. That was also institutionalized in the American Revolution because they were afraid of tyranny. They were afraid of unconstrained executive power. So they built a system that would contain that, constrain it institutionally, not circumstantially. So that's a great gift. Within that universe,
India has a similar system as well. We have a judiciary which regulates the executive power, and it is very important.
universal category of citizen, which has over time come closer to fulfilling its original promise. And within those institutional constraints, that separation of powers, constraint on executive power, within that, we've developed what we might call normal politics, left right politics. People can be in favor of redistribution and government action, and people can be in favor of small government, hands off government, no redistribution or less redistribution. That's the normal left right political spectrum where you respect the institutions and separation of powers and you respect the universal category of citizenship and equality before the law and everything else. I don't see any problems with that whatsoever. I see that as a great gift, not just to this country, but around the world, and other places besides the United States have developed this. The problems arise at the extremes, the far left and the far right, that don't recognize the legitimacy either of capitalism or of democratic rule of law institutions.
That is so true. That is so true. Because people on both sides of spectrum completely dismiss the merits of the other side.
And they want to eliminate constraints on executive power. They want to control the public sphere or diminish the independence of the media. They want to take away markets or private property, and redistribution becomes something bigger than just redistribution. It becomes actually that original Marxist idea of transcending capitalism. So I'm not bothered by the left or the right. I think they're normal, and we should have that debate. We're a gigantic, diverse country of many different political points of view. I'm troubled only by the extremes that are against the system qua system, that want to get rid of it, and supposedly that will be the right path to the future. History tells us that the far left and the far right are wrong about that. But once again, this doesn't mean that you have to be a social democrat. You could be a libertarian. You could be a conservative. You could be a centrist. You could be conservative on some issues and liberal on other issues. All of that comes under what I would presume to be normal politics. And I see that as the important corrective mechanism. Normal politics and market economies, non monopolistic, open, free, and dynamic market economies. I don't like concentrations of power politically, and I don't like concentrations of power economically. I like competition in the political realm. I like competition in the economic realm. This is not perfect. It's constantly needs to be protected and reinvented, and there are flaws that are fundamental and need to be adjusted and addressed and everything else.
I just want to add one more thing. It is not perfect because things are always in a state of flux. Every time there is an election, every time there is something going on, we see a lot of manipulation, lot of uthal-puthal going on. Like, you get my point. So if there is competition, there is always changing things. Systems are not stabilized and all of that.
Especially equality of opportunity. Equality of outcome is unreachable and is
It's not fair also. There should only be equality of opportunity, but not equality of outcome for
a
obvious reasons.
mistake because it produces perverse and unintended consequences. Equality of outcome attempts to make people equal on the outcome side, but attempts to make them more equal on the front end, on the opportunity side. That's really, really important for a healthy society. That's where we've fallen down.
We have digressed from the topic a little bit, but okay.
Our schools are not providing equality of opportunity for the majority of people in all of our school systems. And so I see problems there. I see a need to invest in ourselves, invest in infrastructure, invest in human capital, create greater equality of opportunity, but also to make sure that we have good governance, because governance is the variable that enables you to do all these other things.
Okay, he did not give a clear-cut answer, but I think I got what he was saying. He said that competition should be there, which is like the fundamental of a capitalistic system in which all the businesses compete, but there should also be a good governance so that big competitors don't root out the competition. For example, let's say there is Amazon right now. It is a very huge commercial company, and there are other small online shopping sites. So rules should be in place that also protect the interest of the small uh, websites. So that the Amazon does not, by the power of its money, by the power of its influence, completely root out the competition. So, and does not have a monopoly over the market. So that's what the professor is saying. Okay, there should be competition. There should be a capitalistic system which has a fair competition, and there is good governance in place which protects the interests of all the parties. So I think that is the model of this video. I hope you got it. I hope I got it. I will ponder on it later on. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being with me until the very end. And I will see you in the next one. Give your suggestions if any. Thank you.